For our last example for our Dash applications, please proceed to the course content folder and open your base application notebook. So I was thinking about breaking this apart into two sections, but I think, with the basics we've covered in this section, a lot of it would be pretty repetitive. So what I'm going to try to do is actually go through this base application and just touch on the additions. And I'm going to do a lot of bouncing back and forth. So I've already started this application for those following along. So this is already running. So I already did that, opened it up in our new tab here. And I do have that base application actually in the background updating, and I'm going to walk you through each of the new additions to this, and then we're going to talk about how we're grabbing multiple stocks to iterate and do these same comparators so that I can see multiple things at once for those entry points. All right, so with that, again, for those following along, if you want to go ahead and run it and bounce back and forth with us, great. But the few things that I want to introduce you to here are we're now bringing in multiple securities first and foremost. So all of this at the beginning should feel familiar. You should understand each of these modules we're importing now. But when you get to the ticker section here, instead of typically where we have a symbol, and we've been analyzing Apple for a majority of these, I now have put 4 securities into a list for us to evaluate. So this is going to be us attempting to not just look at a single, but look at multiple. There might be 5, 10, 20, 15, 20 different securities you want to look through at a given time. Something you're not always keying on one, looking for the one entry opportunity, but you want to find it for multiple. So I think it's important to be able to do that with your trading assistant. So you'll notice we've added inside of our updates from our last application, where we looked at just updating and keeping it simplistic. We have added this create comparison. So in our create comparison function, we are actually going to pass it that list of tickers, and we're going to do a few things inside of this that I want to call your attention to. First is we're going to create a new data frame structure. Then we're going to call it our comparison data frame. So with this comparison, we want to we want to run our momentum metrics and create a data frame for each, but then I want to have a repository to stick the latest metrics for each. So that last line, or the most recent line that we've calculated for each security, so that I can see how they're all currently performing and see if there's any current entry points. So this table here, this is a dumbed down version of the analysis for each of these, and then grabbing that last line. So what we're doing is we're defining a variable as a data frame, pd.dataframe, so that we can start to add things to this as we calculate them. Another thing we're doing inside of this function, and again, I know some of my Python people out there may not like globals. I'm going to show you why I use globals, but we are also going to create a variable, and we're going to call it a global df. So this df we're also going to set equal to a dictionary type, so that we can add multiple securities to this df and iterate through utilizing a for loop. So for this global value, we want to be able to go back and see what the historical values were at any point in time. That way, if there's different tickers and I want to see their close price and I want to see their metrics, I can quickly come in here and change that drop down, and then have these metrics update fairly quickly. So now I'm not sitting here waiting for it to go back and re-download all this information. It does take a second, because there is a lot of information that it's iterating through, but it's not something I'm waiting on to rerun the entire Y finance and momentum metrics function. So with that, again, we're going to create that global df, and then we're going to actually iterate using a for loop through each of our tickers. So for each ticker inside of our tickers, I want to run our momentum strategy. So this should feel very familiar. We're going to run our momentum strategy for each individual ticker, and this global df ticker is now going to be assigned df. For example, this will be df AAPL, is going to have all of the same values that we would calculate for that we've calculated and put into our previous tables. And you'll also notice at the bottom of this graphic, for those following along, and we'll we'll even go ahead and change this back to Apple so that you have a graphic you're familiar with or a table you're familiar with. This table, when it updates, we still have all of that same information. So DF AAPL is going to grab that same information and keep it into a global data frame so that we can grab it and use it to quickly update each of these drop downs and update our data table for visual tracking of the numbers and visual tracking of the graphics. We're then going to come down and we're going to add the symbol. So whereas when we typically study these, you can see the symbol hasn't been present up until now, so we are adding the symbol into here, but we're going to add the symbol so that when we add it to our comparison data frame, we can tell which one is which. We're going to then come here and create a variable called cutoff that is going to grab the length of the ticker. So it's going to grab the length of that DF ticker of its data frame, and it's going to just give us a value for that length -1. From there, we are going to trim out using this cutoff value and get the last value. So this will get the last value inside of that data frame. So for Apple, for example, we are grabbing, and let me resort this. It's updating, so this is going to take a second. Get this back to normal. Clicked one too many times here. Alright, there we go. Alright, so for Apple, our most recent value is going to be here. It's going to be on the 24th. You can see open 145.66 and then 147.47. This will correlate to this value here, so where we're running our analytics. So RSI 14 of 47.09, so let's go down and confirm. RSI 14 of 47.09, difference of 0.22, difference of 0.22. So you get the picture. We're basically in this unique version here, we're grabbing that last value of this data frame for each of these securities, and we're then going to deposit them into our comparison data frame. So where we created this data frame, we're going to append that new value to the comparison data frame. So we're going to go through each stock, calculate using the momentum strategy, and then we're going to drop each of the last line items, the most recent item from its unique data frame, into our comparison data frame so that we can analyze and see if there are any buying opportunities for the most recent callback for each of these securities. So if we were to change this to example to DraftKings, again, just to show you what we see, tables update. Okay, so the last RSI 35.36 will match the RSI 14 here of 35.36, and so on for each of the securities we've chosen. So that's one unique change that we've added to this, is we've made sure that we can iterate through multiple tickers, run our create a global, and create a dictionary on top of that global so that we can ensure that we can call each of these back for quick updating of the graphic, but then also taking the last line of each as we iterate through the for loop and creating a secondary table which will allow us to analyze multiple securities simultaneously. Our last line here is all it's doing is cleaning up these values so that I can clean up that table and just get it in the format I want. So have it in this order, quick analysis, so that I can see, here's the values and here's why it's a hold or an enter when these all become to the point where it would be true. Unfortunately, none of these that we've added here are true, but I think you get the picture. All right, so moving down, I'm going to touch on a couple of the additional items that are different. So our analysis plots, we're doing the same thing. We're not doing anything any different. This code is very similar. It's just this code will run for the current ticker we've got here in the tickers list. So whichever one's there, it creates that close price in the metrics figure, and that's what we're dropping into here, just like we did in our last section. So the key difference here is when we run our create comparison analytic, as opposed to just running our momentum strategy as we were in our last section, we are going to pass the tickers value here to get our comp df, which is assigned as the comparison data frame, as the return of this function we just went through. Close figure and metrics figure, again the same. Only difference is what we're passing it. So before we were just passing it, we had only created it for one value, so we could call it whatever the data frame was, by analysis I think, dot date dot close. But instead, now that we are calling df tickers for the default, I'm going to select the first ticker. So I have everything default to the first ticker, which in this case is AAPL. So this will all default to AAPL, since df tickers index of 0 is going to be this first one in the list, which is Apple in this scenario. So you're passing first, when this loads, Apple into here and running this very similar to what you were doing in the last one. Alright, so some additional items we added to this. First, let's touch on this new data table. So we did add another data table in here. This is going to have the same, and actually let me update that value. This is going to have the same characteristics as our other table that we've added in the past. So we just moved in order, of where the analysis table was. Analysis table in our previous examples was at the top. We moved it down to the bottom of the page because we don't want, this big clunky data frame here taking up the entire page and then having to scroll down to get to our metrics or a comparison data frame, because this is the important piece. So we left it at the bottom so you could go to that and grab it. The new data frame is going to be the same, except we're taking, giving it a new ID, and we're assigning it to the comp df. So its data is the comp df, and its columns are the comp df, as compared to the other where we're passing it our df ticker values. And again, for the default, it's ticker 0. It's going to be our first global df of AAPL that it's going to default to, and then we'll show you what that looks like when it auto updates. Alright, the second thing we added in here is a new drop-down list. So this drop-down list, which you can find again on the Bootstrap components and on the Dash Core components. For this, you can find that here after, in order, again after our table, the next thing that comes is this input group. So this input group is going to have just a text field, a generic text field, because this isn't anything like up here where we added a button. This is just a generic text field to tell us there's a tickers. This is the tickers list, and it's appended to a drop down. And I actually chose a Dash Core component drop down because of the way you add options in this. So for me, I like to add the options by giving it a list versus defining the entire list. So it's I think a little simpler to assign the options and then update the options. Personally, from the Dash Core components, so I chose the Dash Core component drop down. Tell it I want the options of my tickers. I want this to be assigned to my tickers, and I want it sorted, and I want the label and the value of each of these to be the same. So for each value that is present in tickers, create a label and a value that are equal, and this will create each of these drop downs that you see inside of this list here. Right. So last thing, we do have two things that will create a callback scenario within our function now. So instead of, and I'm sorry, three things that will create a callback scenario. So in the last ones, we just looked at either having a manual or an automatic input to our callback. In this section, however, we have multiple. We have one that is automated with our interval component, and we have two that will update based off of one, the button click, and then second, the drop down field. So this is one where we make it a little more complex on the callback side so that you can see what this looks like to have multiple things in here, multiple things calling this back, and then give a little more context as to why we use this changed ID property to figure out what we need to update and which one of these we need to run and how we pass those values back. So in here, I think interval components is pretty self-explanatory, right? So every time this hits our 15-second interval as defined, you will get this callback just like you did in our auto callback section. So if you're not familiar with this, or if you want to go back and look at that, this is covered really well in our auto callbacks. For these two, we have changed the functionality of our add button and our drop down. So for our add button, if you want to add a new security to have something else come into the table, you can actually type in that security. Again, I don't have error checking in here, so if you type something wrong, it may break it. You may have to stop it and restart it, so just make sure it's a valid security with a valid name. So I'm going to choose Square. I'm going to go ahead and actually click Add to List. What this is going to do is this is going to add to our drop down list this new function, and then on our 15-second interval update, it will go fetch all of that new information when it iterates through, and it will add these to our table. So if you want to add, go through here and play with these and add multiple to this. But what I wanted to show you is that we have this doing multiple things in an automated fashion and two things in a manual fashion. One, clicking this button will add our new security to our tickers list, and it will make it to where the next time this auto updates, you get your value added to the symbol here, and then when you come in here to change the drop down, you'll be able to now look at this new value. So you can see our metrics and our close figure updated, as well as our data frame down below. So good amount of information for Square here as well. See if there were any buy points. Nope. Okay. So again, I think straightforward enough to understand as far as, now we've got multiple things creating a callback scenario. A button, a drop down, which when selected will update our tables and our graphic, or our table down here and our graphics, and then the interval component, which is the automated side, which will rerun our Y finance and momentum strategy to grab new information and update data frames. So again, it can be very helpful when you're looking at these securities throughout the day to have these update and then fetch that new information for you for the analysis. All right, so real quick here before we wrap up, we are also doing multiple different things as compared to what we were doing in the previous section. So again, it's important to note order. It's important that you are calling the right object that you want to update and its right property to update. So in this, we're going to update our comparison table, analysis table, our close figure, our metrics figure, the tickers drop down, with the tickers drop down, and the options property, and then again our toast, so that we can see updates have in fact occurred. We've got 3 inputs, and in this we've added more states. So we want to see the states of the symbol, our tickers and the value that's in the ticker, our tickers and the values that are present as options within the ticker, and then we want our data from our comparison table and our analysis table, and we'll take a look at why. So for this, again, multiple things can throw you into this callback. So we want the capability to figure out which of these properties put you into this callback state. So this is where it becomes more important to have this changed ID defined. So as I said, this will show you this changed ID property or changed ID variable will actually go through and find which one of these triggered the event. And then based upon that, we will enter one of these states where this will choose what things get updated in our graphics. So there's a few things that are going on and reasons why we're pulling in more of these values as well. So again, defining these in order, we got our interval, we got our click, we got our tickers input symbol, we got our new symbol, which would be in the symbol field, we've got the current symbol chosen in our drop down, we've got our tickers and our options, and we got our comp data frame as our comparison table data, and our analysis data frame as our analysis table data. So we're pulling all of these in for various reasons, and this is going to be the important part and what you should study here to close this section out. So in here, when we do this, because we're going to update all of these items, you have to pass the output for each of these items every time. So even if you don't want to update, when you do a drop down, you don't want to update the comparison table, you still have to tell it what values to use because you've called it as part of your callback. So in here, that's why you notice even if I'm not updating the table when I do a drop down, so if I just change the tickers and I just change that drop down, I don't necessarily want to update that information. I only want to update these metrics and this table here at the bottom. I don't want to do everything here, which is fine. All you have to do is tell it to reuse its same data that you're already pulling. So in here, to accomplish that, for tick list, you have to figure out how the data is coming in and how to pass it again. So creating a tick list, which is going to go through our tickers, get the values, make sure we've got the current ticker list. So these first few here, this first few lines of code are really meant to just grab the ticker's value and convert it to something that's parsable so that we can pass it back to our options, and so that we can make sure that we can add new symbols to it. So like when I added square, I needed a list in which I could add square to if I clicked that button or if that's what triggered the input. Alright, so following down through here, so if our interval component is what changes it, we are obviously going to want to rerun all of our analysis. So we are going to do our create comparison data frame. We're going to pass it the new tickers list. So this tickers list, you saw it updated when I added a new symbol. Well, we want to pass it every value in here, including the new ones that were added, so that we can rerun and create a new comparison data frame. So this new comparison data frame is going to, again, get all of those values and then create a new set, or refresh the set of global variables that exist for us to be able to change our drop downs. From there, we're going to get it in the format, again, to be able to write it to our data. We're going to put into our analysis data frame the symbol, the currently selected symbol. So whatever this currently selected symbol is that we're grabbing from here, so whatever this tickers list is currently on, we're telling it we want our table at the bottom, this table, to use that data, and then we write it again to the records so that we can get it in the right format. Rerun our close and our metrics with that symbol, so with that global DF symbol, and then we tell it data download complete and to open our toast so that we get this value. Before we jump into these others, you can see if you come down here, I am assigning these outputs in order, some of which were created here. So we did recreate a comp DF, an analysis DF, close figure, metrics figure, toast text, and toast open. Tickers we created when we came up here and created our tick list, and then before we leave, we actually assign. Sorry, so we did download tickers. I apologize. So since we didn't update for this first section, we just pulled in our tickers value and we're reassigning it to tickers. So there was nothing to add since it was the interval component that was the update. So tickers is just being grabbed from our data, and that's what's being passed here. So we've already assigned tickers. If we need to recreate tickers like we do when the update button's clicked, we will reassign it here. But for this purpose, we assigned every new variable. We assigned something new to comp DF, analysis DF, close figure, metrics figure, toast text, toast open, and got our tickers from the update itself, or from what's currently in the Dash app. So our next item that could fire it is our update button. So this is the button that we use to add a new stock. When we add a new stock, we want to be able to take the current list and add a new symbol to it. So up here where we created our tickers list and got it into a format where we could pass data to it, we now want to add the new symbol, create tickers as a new sorted list with our new values from our tick list, So this is getting it in the right format so that our drop down can accept it. We want to recreate our close figure and our metrics figure for that currently selected symbol. So if it's our new symbol, great, we can do that. If it's Apple or if it's one of the others, great, it'll do that. And then pass toast text and a toast open. So here we're passing it the same comp df and analysis df that we pulled from our values. So nothing changed. We're getting a new close figure, new metrics figure, new tickers, new toast text, and new toast open from update. And then lastly, down here in tickers, anytime we change the drop down, we want to update our table. We want to update the data that's in our table at the bottom, and then we want to update our close figure and our metrics figure. And we also want to have our toast open to tell us something happened. So again, here, we're not changing this, so we're using the value that's currently there. We're not changing this. We are changing this, we are changing this, we are not changing tickers, and we're adding new toast text and new toast open properties. So you can see why, again, we pull certain things in as states so that we can reuse their values if we don't want them to change, and why we reassign the items we do want to change and then push those out here. And then lastly, again, when code runs, we got this else so that when it runs the first time, it doesn't try to activate any of the properties in here. It'll just go into a prevent update state and make sure this callback does nothing when you first start the application. All right, so with that, I am going to actually go ahead and wrap up this section. I know we've been going for a while here. I apologize. I know we could have probably made this 2 different sections, but I figured let's go ahead and just bite this off all at once. Talk through all these different changes in these graphics and the updates and what's happening. And I think the things I would recommend to practice are any of the new stuff that's added here. Look at the drop downs, make sure you understand how drop downs are being assigned. Really focus on how we iterate through. We're creating global variables, and then lastly, pay a lot of attention to this callback, because again, these callbacks, in my opinion, are the most complicated thing of these updates because of the error handling. Things aren't always clear. Having that data in the right format, getting the properties right, putting them in the right order, only updating certain things if one of these inputs is fired. This is the key part of what we want to learn here. So if you're going to ever get to the point where you auto update and automatically trade and trust this thing to automatically do something for you, you really want to understand what's happening here and iterate through this. So to wrap up, please take the time to get really familiar with this section, especially this callback section with its new complexities, because in our next section we will actually have multiple callbacks and not just one, and then they're going to do multiple things depending on what we want to do. So with that, we'll go ahead and end this, and we'll jump to our last section where we will be creating our final applications, which will actually perform this analysis and then allow us to interact with our broker of choice when we decide something, or when the assistant decides for us that something has met our trading criteria.